Thank you so much for being a part of this series, Cult Recovery Not Canceled, because so many things are right now. We have hoped to provide resources and education and just any tools that you guys need during this really stressful and awful time in the world. And our speakers have been phenomenal, and we keep having people who are coming to ICSA and saying, can we get involved? Can we speak? And the answer is yes. It's just a matter of fitting you in the schedule. So please send us an email if you're interested in speaking and getting involved. And I'm especially excited today to hear Joe Szimhart present and recovery and New Ageism. And do you have your book there that you'd like to share with everybody too?
There it is. I'll mention it.
Yeah. And I'll go ahead and turn the time over to you, Joe, and I'll hop in at the end and help you with the Q&A. Does that work?
Very good. Thank you, Ashlen.
You're welcome.
Okay, so hello, everyone. I hope this is informative. My name is Joe Szimhart, and just if you don't know about me or haven't talked to me about this before, my background has been as an exit counselor, deprogrammer in this field that goes back to 1980, which is the year I bailed out or defected from a large New Age or theosophically based organization. Let's see, I think we're doing okay here. I just noticed something. Anyway, so the cult I was in was Church Universal and Triumphant, and my main purpose for joining it was because it represented something called Agni Yoga, A-G-N-I Yoga, which was founded by two Russian theosophists in the 1920s. They had passed away. The Church Universal and Triumphant was claiming to represent those teachings, and also that the one daughter of Elizabeth Prophet, the leader, daughter they named Tatiana, was supposedly the reincarnation of Helena Rorich, who was the mother of Agni Yoga, the sect. So that drew me in. I was in the movement, maybe dedicated to it for about a year and a half. And then I began to exercise my doubts, looking at skeptical literature, noticing all the conflicts within the organization and similar organizations. And I started this pursuit of healing, of recovery from the organization. I had no exit counseling, no therapy. I was sort of flying by the seat of my pants, so to speak, at the end of 1980. But I have a very inquisitive mind, luckily, and I began reading books I had ignored before that were brought to me that were critical of theosophy, critical of the occult, or what I have come to call the occulture, which is part of human history for thousands of years now, this belief in angels, demons, spiritual forces, magnetic energies. In other words, all these things that are basically hidden or occulted from the senses. Hidden masters, guiding influences in politics, all this kind of thing that informs the human race, and to this day. So I began to sort all that out, and my generating energy for that was basically anger. I was pissed off at myself for having gotten into this stuff, and I was kind of angry at the fact that people, in some cases, were knowingly deceiving me about what they were informing me about. So that deconstruction process was my recovery. I'd like to quote something from a book. It's called Leaving Cults, The Dynamics of Defection. And this is by Stuart Wright. Stuart, I met him at one of these Society for the Scientific Study of Religion conferences that I attended. In fact, I think I was the first deprogrammer ever to attend one of these conferences in the late 1980s. And I got to know some of these people. I caused a bit of a stir because there was a divided camp, very, very widely divided between the academic sociology community or sociology of religion community and the anti-cult network, as they called it, which was the Cult Awareness Network, and AFF at the time, the American Family Foundation, which later became ICSA. So there was this argument that the people on the ICSA side or the cult awareness side had framed the cult problem in very crude ways in order to fit a narrative that you had to be deprogrammed in order to really exit a cult. And there were a clique of people within the Cult Awareness Network that actually believed that. They didn't think that if you exited on your own, you were properly deprogrammed. I'm an example of someone who successfully deprogrammed himself, so to speak, without any help from a professional. Or some people would say, for instance, followers of Ted Patrick back in the day, that if you left a cult on your own, you weren't really programmed. And anyway, the argument goes on, but Stuart Wright looked into this back then, and he tried to look at the argument. Of course, his book was ignored at the time by Cult Awareness Network people, but I purchased it. It came out in 1987, and he said something here on page 91 of this book, which I'd like to read because it speaks a little bit about the recovery process that I'll go into a little more regarding the New Age aspect of it in terms of belief in spirits, angels, and occult forces, and the belief in the powers of the mind and mental healing and that kind of thing, of what's called New Thought. So Stewart says, I would like to suggest that the ambivalence of former members derives from the refusal to simplify a complex set of experiences, events, ideas, and emotional attachments. For example, strong affective ties experienced during involvement are not automatically dismissed as invalid because of subsequent ideological differences. Some elements of membership undoubtedly make lasting and favorable impressions upon defectors. Post-involvement evaluation of membership is essentially a sifting process in which favorable events or experiences are separated out from what is later perceived as wrong, immoral, or theologically adrift. As a result, one will find voluntary defectors defending certain aspects of the group while criticizing others. This kind of selectivity and separation of the more highly valued aspects of one's membership gives an indication of careful reflection on the part of the individual. So he's saying that there's some careful reflection going on, which is really, I think, the main process of recovery. It's trying to remove the emotional, devotional belief that causes psychological closure into what's called, this prefrontal cortex. We have the executive function of sorting out what's right and wrong, of applying skepticism, of making judgments and reassessing and making new judgments. That filter that helps us to test reality. I mean, that's part of our brain, that's part of our will, that's part of who we are, and it's part of what's undermined by totalist groups. The New Age groups, the ones I was in, would talk about the monkey mind, that little guy in there that keeps bouncing around and doubting this and not accepting that and making fun of things and not being tamed enough to believe in a certain system. Also there was this mantra among some of the groups that says the only thing between the heart, which is the seat of the soul, and God, or the universal consciousness, is the head. Somehow the thinking person can get in the way of this relationship. So the idea, borrowed from some aspects of Buddhism, is to create the no mind, the no self, get the self out of the way, get the ego out of the way, in order for the heart or the self center to be connected with God, Brahman, the universe, whatever words are applied by the particular cult or group. So this idea of disengaging the prefrontal cortex is very dominant in many of these groups that we call cults, and especially the group I was in was very good at doing this. The Church Universal and Triumphant had borrowed a lot from the prior I Am organization, which borrowed quite a bit from Theosophy and from the New Thought groups that promoted something called affirmations and decreeing. In other words, speaking affirmations and positive things out loud, or decreeing to get rid of evil, or to increase power and love and all this sort of thing, can actually make changes not only within the self, but within the environment and potentially within the world. So the recovery from that, I remember I had to really make a huge effort to readjust the way I thought about how my thoughts worked. For a year and a half, I was trying to believe and exercising a form of practice within the group that encouraged me to change reality by maintaining a positive framework, or taking on the mind of Christ or the mind of Buddha, or whatever ascended master was in the particular group. To reverse that took an intellectual effort. I had to read about the background of these groups to find out if indeed these leaders were connected to ascended masters. Were they connected to angels? What are angels? What are these ascended masters? Where did they come from? Is it possible that demons are involved, or what they call dark forces? Are these real things? These are questions that people in every religion ask, and some religions will offer the idea out that demons are real, and that you can pray and get the intercession of angels and God and so forth to keep them at large and from affecting us. In fact, I just read today that in the Catholic Church, its more fundamentalist branch in Italy, one of the archbishops developed a prayer exorcism to stop the demon of the coronavirus from. It's kind of a devilish enterprise is what it's looked at as, and it's meant to destroy our faith, because now we can't go to church and gather together. I mean, these are really simplistic ways of putting together a picture of reality in order for people to believe that they can somehow pray away something like this, and not just pay attention to the science or what the scientists are telling us to do. Again, in modern times and as in ancient times, we have this magical way of dealing with reality, and many religions take advantage of it, including currently this archbishop in Italy. This is not to say that the Pope approves of it, or that all Catholics believe that this is the way to behave. Catholicism, like a lot of the old religions, is not monolithic, even though it might have one central authority. Like I say, if you spend any time talking to a Catholic, you'll find a different point of view from the next Catholic you talk to, and so forth. So people can hold their own views within the same organization. I was just listening to a lecture on Judaism and its origins and its current state. There is no monolithic Judaism. There is no such thing as a Jew that fits the stereotype or you can't impose a stereotype on the Jewish people. They have very diverse points of view, and the scholar was pointing out what they were. The same applies to Catholics, I think, to Buddhists, Hindus especially. I mean, their religion goes all over the map with their 33,000 gods and different points of view, from abstract rationalism to fundamentalist belief in the power of statues and deities and all of that. So if people are more interested in my personal recovery of how I got into and out of the cult I was in and got into the intervention field, I mean, you can read my book, Santa Fe, Bill, Tate, and Me, and I just released it this year, and it's self-published, so please forgive the errors in it. I didn't have a professional editor, although I went through this about 6 times to comb out the errors in it. But it explains more in depth of some of the things I'll be talking about here. I'm going to go on for about maybe 10 more minutes and then try to open this up to Q&A if that'll work. So I had some notes I took down here. Now, one of the things I'd like to bring up is the relationship between these exotic beliefs or strange beliefs, what some people call false beliefs, what I call overvalued beliefs for the most part, of people within cults and religions. For instance, an overvalued belief that I had was that my leader, then Elizabeth Prophet, was really in contact with angels, saints, gods and goddesses from Greek religion, from Oriental religion, from the Catholic saints, and so forth. And I entertained that as a possibility. Now, I was raised Catholic, so I was raised with the possibility of the intercession of saints. So the experience in the cult tapped into that kind of childlike or youthful belief. In a sense, it falls under the category of a folie à deux, or a shared delusion that people can have. And you could argue in a broad sense that all religions are a shared delusion. Any atheist or heavy skeptic will say that's the case. Marx himself coined that phrase, that religion is the opiate of the people. One of the things I've been doing for the past 20 years is working in a psychiatric hospital, and I've had a lot of cases come in, maybe I can remember a handful anyway, of someone who was diagnosed as psychotic or having a brief psychotic disorder, when in fact, when I met them during my intake process, because I would be the first person to meet them before introducing them to the psychiatrist, that they were more suffering from a shared delusion. I can think of one case, for instance, where a young woman, maybe 20 years old, was raised by a dominant mother and still living with her, and had adopted the mother's belief system, which included some crazy things about the government. And the mother may have been schizophrenic, but not necessarily dysfunctional in her schizophrenia. And the young woman had adopted some of these ideas and got carried away with some and said some things, and the police brought her in for some reason to get evaluated. As I talked to her, I mean, I could tell she herself didn't have a schizophrenic disorder. She was like a cult member who was reciting things that sound crazy to outsiders, but make perfect sense within the group, within the rational closed system of the organization. And these closed systems are rational. I mean, they're thought out, they're put together in ways which, 1 and 1 doesn't always equal 3, it can equal 2 many times within these, what we might call irrational systems, but there's a rationality that goes on within them, which causes people to think it's okay, it makes sense. So there's this range or spectrum between what we call mental illness, when someone becomes disordered with these bizarre beliefs in angels or in the government putting a chip in their head, and groups which believe that the government is some kind of a dark force, that it has hidden CIA agents watching them, and so forth. So where to draw that line is not easy. It takes a lot of looking at the group and looking at the individual and interpreting whether, have they really split from reality, become schizophrenic? Schizo means to split. Or is there some kind of a give and take where they compartmentalize this fantasized world and yet function quite normally in their job and in their normal interactions while going to the store or going to their job? So it takes some time to sort this out. So, and I think in the same case, an ex-member has to sort it out in themselves, what's real and what's not. And of course, it comes through education primarily. It comes through talking with other ex-members. It comes through the process of living, of normalizing, of getting more, quote, sane, unquote, as time goes on after bailing out or leaving a group, or in some cases getting thrown out of these groups. I was online earlier today, and I get this email, this advertisement for a person that on her website promotes energy healing, And so I just want to read you this as an example of the language people use to attract people into a framework of what I call magical thinking, or the powers of the mind over physical reality. So she begins by saying, throughout history, a healer has been known as someone who facilitates healing in another, from Native American medicine men and women to ancient shamans. They all offer an amazing talent to heal suffering by tapping into and empowering one's own healing capacity. Now, if we stop there, I can more or less agree with this statement. It's relatively rational. She's talking about the placebo effect. And if we allow nature to just take its course, a lot of these things that we think are illnesses, even minor depression, go away on their own just by trying to live normally and have a good diet and not getting overly obsessed with the particular problem we have. I mean, we have a self-healing mechanism that's funded to us through evolution, if you will, or God, if you want to be religious about it. That works quite well for the average person, and we get through bad times, some illnesses, or emotional breakdowns by just working through it, and without therapy, without medicine, without a shaman, and so forth. So now this woman goes on in the next paragraph and says, energy healing therapy, whatever that is, right, is a powerful approach to wellness that can revolutionize any life. Now she's getting into making totalist statements. It can revolutionize any life, all right? Behind the scenes of our beautiful world, a complex network of energy fuels and connects everyone and everything. Now, we can sort of believe that if we understand subatomic physics and dark matter and the way magnetic forces work and so forth, and the way, for instance, a forest is one organism with all kinds of things going on at the roots and communicating through the mushroom complexes under the ground to other roots. And we've studied this, and there is this organic communication going on within nature, within the universe, and so forth. Electrons, protons, neutrinos, they all have an effect on one another. So yeah, we can sort of believe that. And then she says, by learning to understand and apply this energy as medicine, we can powerfully guide our lives into better and better directions, healing what debilitates us and encouraging our vast personal potential for health, happiness, and meaning. Again, there's some truth in this. The idea of being somewhat positive, or what I would rather call taking on a challenge rather than being trapped in inertness. You know, it's better to take on a challenge than to just sit and mull over something and not do anything about a problem. So now she says her guest is this Cheryl Como. And so Cheryl is an author, educator, and energy practitioner offering holistic health services since 1995. So somehow these words thrown at you, like author, educator, energy practitioner, and time, meaning a period of 25 years, quarter century, right? It sounds like impressive credentials if you're not looking deeper. Cheryl incorporates different healing modalities that best suit her clients' needs. Again, very abstract words that we can fill in what we believe in this. And then in her book, A Change in Perception, she talks about opening the mind to possibilities beyond what's directly in front of us, to find peace through change, to work with life, in quotes, not fight against it, to awaken one's beliefs. And this is something which gives her credibility, apparently. For several years, Cheryl has been working with a Dr. Tony Libro, a medical intuitive. Now, I've met people that claim that they are such a thing, and that's really just a kind of a license or a title that you slap on yourself. I mean, there's no school that can train you to become a medical intuitive. Well, there might be a few out there, but basically they're just self-aggrandizing. It's not anything legitimate in my view. But to her, this is legitimate. And then she says, through intervention of ancient teachings combined with her personal experiences, these works can help wake the divine inner light to help expand the consciousness and heal the self. So here again, ancient teachings as if we know what they really were and how shamans really worked in ancient times. I mean, when we look at modern shamans, they tend to be hybrids using some modern medicine along with ancient modalities, like a lot of acupuncturists. Acupuncturists are trained not to overdo what acupuncture can help you with, and they're supposed to refer people to regular doctors when acupuncture doesn't have any effect on certain problems within the self. So what I'm bringing up here is people get attracted to this kind of thing for a couple of reasons. One is that I think a lot of the New Age and maybe a lot of other kinds of cults, including fundamentalist groups, like to believe in personal experience, that's the beginning and end of truth, of reality. And so if you can change someone's personal experience, you can change the reality, so it goes. And if you can change your own personal experience, you can change your reality. Meaning you can become wealthy, healthy, and wise if you do this technique. What I try to tell people is that personal experience is only the beginning of the inquiry of what reality is. It doesn't end it. It doesn't set up this thing where people say, well, you have your reality and I have my reality. There's a lot more to, quote, reality than our limited self can experience. And certainly most of us know that if we have a conversation with someone about something, then we can learn something, share a reality, improve our reality, and maybe improve theirs, and so forth. I mean, this is the process of education and normal scientific approach. But this kind of a healer, the New Age wants to believe that you have some kind of infinite power within, and that can be tapped. And it can be tapped in several ways. It can be tapped by getting an angel or a god or a goddess involved with your particular condition, or you can just call it the universe and using some technique in order to tap into that. You can have a healing crystal, an object. You can have a statue of a god or a goddess in your home, and it creates this energy. You can go to someone that channels the energy from Buddha, from some ancient healer, or maybe from Paracelsus, the great doctor and mystic, and somehow that's going to help you get through your problem. So what I'd like to do, if you're there, Ashlen, is maybe open this up to questions, because I feel like I'm starting to ramble a bit, and hopefully then it'll get more specific.
Okay. We actually have a few really great questions right off the bat. First off, some clarification. Someone asked, what was the name of that Society for Study of Religion?
Okay. There's actually two in sociology, and I've gone to conferences. In fact, I've lectured at one of them. The one I mentioned, this is Stuart Wright's book, The Dynamics of Defection. And it's good. It's a good read for anybody, I think, even today. It's called the Society for the Scientific Study of Religion. Dr. Eileen Barker, who we know has been a participant in this sort of thing. In fact, I first crossed her path at one of these conferences. She didn't know me at the time, and I didn't know her, but I heard her speak back in the late 80s. And the other one is called the Association for the Sociology of Religion. And a lot of the same people go to both conferences or have gone. And they're not very large groups. Maybe the conferences back then, when I was going, went to about 4 or 5 of them and spoke, attracted about 200 to 300 people. So they're not like, the Association for the Academy of Religion, which attracts 6,000 to 7,000 or more scholars. And I've gone to a couple of those. These are smaller, more concentrated in one particular niche of religion field. So Association for Sociology of Religion, and I got to keep looking at this. It's SSSR, or Society for the Scientific Study of Religion. they have a lot of publications out there. I used to get their publications. I was a subscriber, but I stopped doing it because my shelf started piling up with stuff that I never read. And, you know, so at a certain point, you got to cut that stuff off.
Yeah. Someone, could you, what is the spelling of Stuart Wright's in the name of the book? What is the spelling of the name of the book?
Okay, Stuart is spelled S-T-U-A-R-T, Wright, W-R-I-G-H-T, and it's called Leaving Cults, The Dynamics of Defection.
Perfect. Thank you so very much. I'm just,
Sure.
Another question that came through, someone said, "Hi, Joe. In the Moonies, I went to a retreat in South Korea for 50 days, where we were told that there are evil spirits in our bodies, and the only way to get them out was to hit yourself. We would sit in lines, there were thousands of people, and chant for hours, hit the person as hard as you can on the back to hit out the evil spirits. During my time there, 2 young American men died because they went crazy and hit themselves literally to death. What is it in us that drives us so crazy? Why do you think humans are so needy for a God and then let ourselves be controlled and abused in search for that God?"
Yeah. Do you have about 5 years for me to
Yeah.
explain that?
Yeah. It's
I
a
don't
good
know.
question. I mean,
No, it's a good question, and I think what we're dealing with is the madness of crowds. It's well known. It's been studied. People get caught up in the energy of what's around them in their environment, and they begin to doubt their own thoughts and begin to take on the group mind or so forth. And especially if they believe there's a powerful leader that knows things and shows an example of what to do, then people all begin to do it. Like, for instance, good mentalists and hypnotists have been able to prove this, that in mimicking what preachers do when they get people to kind of pass out with the Holy Spirit when they have hands laid on them on stage. You know, a hypnotist can actually set that up. You set up a couple proxies, you have them fall down when the hypnotist does something, and you bring people up on stage, and when they blow on them or put their hand up, the people will fall over, you know, and it's a power of suggestion within a particular environment. So people can be made suggestible and have a group mind. The Reverend Moon, by the way, I did a number of interventions with Moonies and successful ones, and I worked with several people that were former members of Reverend Moon's group. So I understand the organization and it's functioned fairly well, you know, as I recall it. Reverend Moon had a habit of hitting people on stage. In fact, one of the ex-members I talked to said he was caught up on stage when Moon was there this is back in the 70s. And he went, and Moon called him over, and he just punched him full on in the chest, and it hurt. I mean, it hurt. It bruised his ribs. He said he had a big black and blue mark there for a month. But as a believer, he saw it as a holy mark, as something sacred that happened to him. That's how he defined it. Now, what would happen if Moon would have hit someone from, you know, a street gang? Well, the guy would have beat him up, you know.
yeah,
There would be no sacred power. There would be no suggestion going on other than this asshole just punched me and I'm going to hit him back.
yeah.
You know, so context means everything. And I think
It looks like Joe froze. So if everyone could hang tight, I think his internet may have, looks like he cut out. Should just be able to jump back in here. Sorry, everybody. While Joe's figuring out a way to reconnect too, I wanted to mention the free web membership that we're offering right now, the ICSA is offering right now. If you guys, need a membership, if you need resources, want to take advantage of that, please send me an email. That would be the best way to do it, and we can make sure and get you guys
Okay, it looks like
connected.
I'm
You're
back.
back.
I think
You're back. Yay.
we were cut off there for a little bit. Okay.
Okay. I'm glad you're able to jump back in. So you were saying you were in the middle of explaining how Reverend Moon, if he were to go out on the street, he'd get beat up for.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, he was smart enough not to do something like that unless he had control, psychological, emotional, devotional control over the audience around him. And his sub-leaders did too. They knew not to behave that way, out in public. They were very careful, and they knew how to recruit people by disguising who they were and getting them to believe that maybe they were going to talk about world peace when in fact they're inviting people to a recruitment weekend to believe in the divine principle. So yeah, there's different ways to deconstruct that kind of experience and why that happened, but some members get carried away. They'll take a belief further than the cult actually wants them to take it. I'll give an example. The group The Way International, which was centered in Knoxville, Tennessee, and it was a quasi-Christian group. I met this ex-member, or he got thrown out, and I did some work with him in Santa Fe in New Mexico. But in the early 80s, he got recruited into the group, and he had a few mental issues, I think. So when he got into it, he began to believe more than the people around him believed. He was really excited by the teachings. And then he started to have this revelation that maybe he himself was Jesus. Well, that's going too far within a cult. Only Moon can be the Messiah, or only the preacher, Victor Rearwell, could be the dominant one in the Way International at the time. So this guy was staying in a hotel in Dayton, Ohio, and that was it. They didn't want him to come back, and so he said, "I have to prove to these people that I'm really Jesus. I'm going to prove it." So what he did was, in his own schizophrenic breakdown, or psychotic breakdown at the time, was to go down to the swimming pool where there were other guests there. It was summertime. He took off all his clothes. He was naked. He announced that he was Christ come again. And he said, "If you don't believe me, I'm going to walk across this water." And so he stepped out on the deep end, he told me. And he said, "I fell to the bottom like a stone." He said, "I knew then that Satan had fooled me." So they put some towels around him, and they found out who he was, and they called his father. His father came and got him and took him home, to New Mexico. And when I met him, he was an apprentice mechanic for Sears, and he had come by the plaza where I was doing portraits, and we talked about his experience. And he was doing okay. He had gotten on some medication, and he was doing okay. But some members can carry something too far, and apparently that's why maybe these people in South America beat themselves up to the point where they died. And this is when things get out of control, and that's when leaders start getting sued if it gets out. That a workshop went too far. Some people ended up in a mental hospital, or someone broke a bone, or whatever. I recall, for instance, I'll tell this one story. I was pretty active in doing interventions with people in the Ramtha cult, the Ramtha School of Enlightenment. It was headed by J.Z. Knight, and it's still going on. It's still functioning full on up in Yelm, Washington. They do a lot of webinars and stuff, modernized. But back then there was more workshops in Yelm, and there was a large horse corral where they would do these exercises with blindfolds on, and they would do something called C&E, consciousness and energy, walking around with their hand like this in front of them, and doing a form of breathing that sounded like this. So there was hyperventilation, blindfold, walking around like this, projecting energy. And so at one of these things, J.Z. Knight as Ramtha, the god, she was being possessed or channeling this god, told 1,000 people to separate, 500 on each side, apart from each other, about 40 yards or so, or 50 yards apart, aligned on the wall, to begin doing this energy thing and to start running full on, blindfolded at each other, and that the energy will protect you if you do it right. If you do it right. Well, guess what happened? I mean, people were bouncing off of each other like bowling pins, and several had to go to the hospital. The guy that I was talking to, and I had him on videotape explaining this, had a huge knot on his head, you know, a bloody nose, and sore ribs from running into a couple people. And then there were some people, the older women in the group, some, he said, that were so afraid to do it, they just stood frozen on the fence line. You know, so apparently they didn't do that experiment again because word got out about it. But this is the kind of crazy thing that people do when they're under the power of suggestion. Yeah. You know, to do something like a scene out of Braveheart. You know, you run full on with your weapons and crash into one another. And this is considered to be a warrior, you know, because they were going to train people to be warrior mystics or warrior shamans or whatever. You know, this kind of language gets into the brain, and you begin acting out in very irrational, stupid ways because the leader says do it, you know. So, I mean, I can go on and on with these kinds of examples of how people get harmed by acting out on overvalued beliefs. So I'll go for another question.
Someone said, thanks for hosting this. I really appreciate it. Thank you for whoever made that comment. I'm so glad. Someone said, hi, Joe. It's interesting that you picked apart that statement as an example of what leads to magical thinking. As you know, I view the term in a different way than just believing in unicorns and such. That statement is a good example of how magicians use the fallibility of memory to lead someone to believe and act in ways they want. In order to examine if one is being brought into this type of thought, one must pick apart the facts put forward, no matter how insignificant they might be, and examine them each separately. In this way, one can intuitively develop a better picture of the reality of the situation. Could you speak a little bit about the fallibility, especially temporal, of memory and how group leaders manipulate that aspect?
Well, you know, memory is not tape recording, as we all know. If you study what happens, how the brain absorbs reality, there's short-term memory, long-term memory, and then there's, you know, other things going on that help us to navigate through life, whether it's through a thought process or just through remembering what an environment was like the last time we were there. There's also something I think that's manipulated by magicians and by cult leaders, and that's also perception. Human beings cannot focus on more than one thing at a time, and magicians take advantage of this, you know, to the great delight of audiences, you know, by misdirecting people, and then they do something that the person didn't even see happening, and they're fooled. You know, in some ways, cult leaders do this sort of thing too. They well, I'll give you a real simple example. I went to a workshop where they were recruiting people into this group that believed in some kind of an angel presence, and they said something like, you know, have you ever heard your name being called out from behind you, and you turn around and there's no one there? Almost everybody I know has had that happen to them, you know, in some form or another. Your brain can trick you into thinking you're hearing something. It's like a hallucination. It doesn't mean you're sick, but we do have these occurrences sometimes, you know, or somebody actually says our name and they're not there when we turn around and we think nobody was there. The workshop built on that simple idea to show that there is an invisible world that's trying to communicate with us, you know, and then it went on from there. You know, as far as memory, and I think that there was a cult called Bridging the Gap that I dealt with. I had exited quite a few members out of it. It was based on A Course in Miracles, which is a popular New Age, New Thought group, allegedly a book, allegedly channeled by Jesus. It was called The Voice, and it teaches you to believe that this reality doesn't exist out here, that it's in a kind of an attack on what's really real, which is our eternally existent self. This psychiatrist developed a teaching in Colorado based on A Course in Miracles. It was called Bridging the Gap. And he had convinced my client, the woman, that her husband had been abusing her in their entire marriage during the workshop. So he inserted a false memory into her. And I don't want to get into this too deeply, but in fact, what happened, she was kind of a vulnerable person anyway. She was very sensitive, and sometimes would not keep herself together during the marriage, and the husband cared about her very much, and every now and then he would just yell, "Carol, get it together," you know, or something like that. And they expanded on that, and caused her to believe that he was being abusive, and that he actually had hit her at one time in a process where she was recovering a memory, you know, and in fact the guy never had, and when she came out of the cult, she said, you know, he never did hit me, I just came to believe it when I was in session with the group. You know, so memory can be affected. It's proven by Elizabeth Loftus, for instance, that false memories can be inserted in children, they can be inserted in adults by a kind of manipulative therapy. I mean, that's been shown. It doesn't work on everybody, but it can be done.
Thank you for answering that. Someone asked, let's see here. I've done some research on this, but was curious to find out if you know or know of any resources where I can find out more about the ideomotor effect. Specifically, how do people who use Ouija boards channel via these boards use them so proficiently, or at least appear to do so? Also, how would someone hypnotize or at least convince a large group of people to believe they were hypnotized other than what you've said?
Well, let me answer the second one first. Every stage magician that does entertainment knows that in an audience of 100 or 200 people, about 10 to 15% of the people are more highly suggestible than those that aren't. The people that in average audiences that are highly suggestible tend to be creative, tend to be able to absorb themselves in novels, you know, totally get lost in them, can see a movie and not be aware of anybody around them, you know, and so they have this talent. It's actually a talent, but it can be used against them. So the stage hypnotist does something, for instance, like everybody in the audience will go into an elevator and go down different stages with them while their eyes are closed. And then they give some suggestions, and then they tell everybody to put their hands above their head, link their fingers, and then say something like, you know, at the count of 10, I want you to pull your fingers apart. Well, there's about 10% of the people that can't pull their fingers apart. They're stuck together because of prior suggestions that the hypnotist had done, you know, and he wants those people up on stage, you know, so and I've seen somebody do this a couple of times. And of course, when they come up on stage, they'll do things like act like chickens, do silly things, you know, that are going on that entertains the audience. And then of course, the hypnotist takes them out of the trance effect, which basically means obey my voice. You know, that he becomes the authority figure in their mind. There is this sense of compliance, you know, that he's exploiting. So there's different layers of compliance. Just by the very fact that you're sitting in an audience wanting to be entertained is the first stage of compliance. You know, that if you go to a Mooney workshop to hear about world peace, you've already entered the first stage of compliance. And you're also in a controlled group now. You're in a room, you're in an audience, you're focusing on one thing, this guy talking. And so the hypnotist and the cult leader will take people through different stages of compliance. During the recruitment process, you know, I've seen some cult recruiters maybe get 10% of the audience to stay and sign on for the next workshop. So they're not interested in controlling everybody. They want to get a decent number to just continue whatever process they're doing in order to get people to stick within the group. No hypnotist wants a bad actor on stage when he's entertaining. He wants compliant people. He doesn't care whether they're in trance or not. He just wants them to obey commands. So a person might say, well, I know this is silly, but I'm going to act like a chicken because I am having fun up here. The hypnotist doesn't care whether he's acting or truly in trance. He has a show to put on. And the same thing with cult leaders. They don't care if someone is just kind of going along, seeing if this is real or totally believing if it's real. They want them there to be deployable agents. They're, you know, and they'll work with the doubts and all of that as it goes along. So, you know, cult members aren't one of a kind, as audiences in a stage hypnotist performance aren't one of a kind either. A certain percentage are going to become really compliant, others are going to act compliant, and others are not going to be compliant at all. And as far as the Ouija board, let me get the ideomotor effect.
With the Ouija board, yeah.
Yeah, I mean that can be explained pretty well. You know, we can go into unconscious states and act volitionally, it seems. You know, so I'll give an example. We all know this. If you've played a musical instrument and you've practiced for 20 years and you're in a band, and let's say you're a guitar player, and at some point you begin riffing and you're in a zone. You're not even thinking. Your fingers just flying and they're just moving, you know, and you don't even know how you managed to get that piece done so well. The audience cheers, you know, and you know, so that's partly the ideomotor effect. The Ouija board is a very simple device. It has the numbers and the alphabet on it, and there's this planchette which moves around quite easily because it's a slick board, and it has these, in most cases, a plastic 3 little prongs on it. With a little practice, you can get that thing moving around fairly well, just like you're learning to type. You know, people that are expert typists, it's almost an ideomotor effect when they're typing. They're not thinking of these letters down there. They're looking at the screen and getting all these letters perfectly. Well, there's a similar typing mechanism that happens in the Ouija board. The person's communicating with a spirit, something's happening, and the people that are really talented at this can start spelling things out and maybe using a part of the brain that's more spontaneous rather than you know, looking for an orderly way of doing it. I mean, there's a way to test whether that information is coming from outside the actor pushing the planchette around or not, and I won't get into that, but I mean, Ouija board is just another way to fool people that you're in touch with the spirit, you know, in my view, and the average psychic doesn't need a Ouija board, but it's kind of neat to have this thing spelling stuff out and wowing the people around there that something's actually communicating with you. Yeah, but go ahead.
I wanted to say too, there's a really excellent video on YouTube called Captive Minds
Yeah.
that I don't know if you've seen it or heard of it. I'm sure you have, but if they go into just kind of this control that a hypnotist can have over somebody, the process, they really break it down. And they go into large crowds too. Yeah, it's called Captive Minds. And it came to me, Pat Ryan actually showed this to me in Manchester. And I think that'd be a really excellent resource as well. Someone asked, what do you think of the Moonies, Unification Church offshoot, the Rod of Iron Ministries, World Peace and Unification Sanctuary Church?
You know, right now I can't place it. Is that run by one of the sons of Moon?
They didn't say. Perhaps
Okay.
they may add a comment here in a second, clarifying.
Okay. Because I know there's several offshoots, and
Yes, it is.
It is. Okay.
Okay, well, that one, as far as I understand, is in a way even more radical than the father's organization. And all I recall is that they sell toy guns and munitions, and one of the Trump sons came to a opening or to and was on stage with the leader to promote the business of this moon offshoot organization. I mean, I don't know a whole lot about it. I have to look at my notes again. I can't talk about it off my head, but I am aware of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Someone asked a really good question. Are you worried about New Age and New Thought attitudes becoming too influential in wider society, even infiltrating politics, such as, Ivanka Trump, Marianne Williamson? And do you think that it is part of a cultural war that is organized and unstoppable?
I think that this has been around since the dawn of human beings, for thousands of years. This idea of occult influences and it's part of culture. You see it in Egyptian culture, you see it in Babylonian culture, you see it in ancient Jewish culture. There's also questioning within those cultures, like for instance in the Torah. There's lines in there to not go to soothsayers, to sorcerers, because ancient cultures like modern cultures have known that these people lie to us. They're called false prophets, and they get found out over time, and they get punished, they get hung, they get tarred and feathered. There's a lot of snake oil salesmen in the 19th and 18th century that were tarred and feathered in communities and ostracized. So even uneducated people can figure this out. You don't have to have a course in skepticism to know that somebody's selling something that's not working. And even though some people swear by it, so we have this culture, the occulture or the New Age culture or the New Thought culture around us. I mean, it's prevalent in business and advertising. You find this idea of the positive thinking cult. Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, the whole Andrew Carnegie courses. It goes on and on. It's infiltrated the way business people think and behave. It infused in advertising on how to manipulate people to buy products. The beliefs that people want you to have about toilet paper, for instance, that it's better than some other toilet paper is incredible. What they do to try to convince you that this talking bear, is pleased with the toilet paper, therefore you should be pleased with it also. So yeah. Advertising is full of misdirection, we're bombarded with it. So to the fact that most people tend to get jaded and somewhat immune because there's so much of it, it becomes white noise. But it's also very effective. And, just like if a leader, like a president, says that a particular drug is going to help you with the COVID-19 problem, those true believers out there will go out and buy this stuff up, and it's just the power of suggestion and the power of devotion. Those two things, when combined, can become very dangerous. They also can become very motivating. It's what works in militaries. You get in boot camp, gets you to become devoted to a cause. A suggestion or a command is going to get you to move and to act, even to the point of sacrificing your life.
Yeah, thank you. I think that this is a great question to end on, actually. Someone said, would love to hear more about your journey of recovery and education. You are very articulate and easy to understand.
Wow, that was nice to hear. I'm an autodidact in a sense, meaning that I've picked up things from people, self-educated. My colleagues in the field, from Pat Ryan to others, I've learned a lot from. The whole exit counseling field, the intervention field, was one of sharing information, apprenticing with one another. I might help somebody understand theosophy, somebody else helps me understand about some Oriental religion I never heard about that they were an ex-member of. And so there was this very loose flow, but very rich in information among us colleagues when we met and we talked. I have to thank the the cult members I tried to help, when their families or their spouses or even their adult children hired me to try to exit them from a group, um, if I would be challenged with information I didn't know after that case was over, I'd go and research it. I'd get a book, or I research it, get notes. So, one thing kept piling up and expanding on another throughout the process. And I think that is the process of education, is to draw out reality from whatever it is you're interacting with. Educare means to draw out. And so we, it's never ending. I have to go back and reread things because I forget them if I don't use them. Like anybody, it's like muscle memory. If you stop exercising, your muscles get weaker. The same thing with what we know. The more we use it, the more it seems to come out easily. The less we use it, we have to go back and reference again and look things up. I think I'm motivated by initially anger at myself for being so dumb to get into a cult. And I'm using that word dumb in quotes. It actually takes a lot of energy and intellectual power to get into even reading theosophy and Rosicrucianism and that kind of thing, because it's very obtuse. It uses abstract languages. The people involved tend to be better than average educated about some things. Heads of state have been involved in that kind of thing. Gorbachev's, Riza especially, who were, the first family of Russia, helped set up the Agni Yoga Society as it is today. There's 3 million followers of Agni Yoga, the cult that I was in Russia, and Riza was a devoted person, and you're talking about a well-educated person in power in Russia. I think it's a matter of motivation. It's a matter of interest. I'm an artist by trade, or I have been, and I still produce stuff. And so I'm always curious about how the mind works, why we produce the things we do. Why am I painting this? I ask myself, because all stuff's coming out on the canvas, and I'm curious about the way the human mind works and the way we behave as a result of our thoughts.
Thank you. And I know that we were going to end on that, but someone just submitted a question real quick that I want to read to you. We'll make this our final question. Sorry about that. Someone said, "Hi, Joe. With your understanding of group mind manipulation, what is it about a program when you know you cannot reach a person you are hired to investigate without speaking to the person?"
Program. Okay, say that again.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if I understand the question fully myself. Hi, Joe. With your understanding of group mind manipulation, what is it about a program when you know you cannot reach a person you were hired to investigate without speaking to the person?
The program.
Yeah.
That's where I'm missing something here. But so you're hired to investigate without speaking to the person. Well, if you know that I'm going to interpret this. If you know that the person's involved in a particular mindset, or a way of belief, to study the belief system is to study the person to some extent. You're going to have a better understanding of their behaviors, what they react to. Like, for instance, the group I was in said you shouldn't wear black or red and some other colors. So you can understand that person. When you go to meet with that person for the first time, you won't wear a black shirt. You'll wear something more appropriate to their belief system, so that you have better rapport immediately. So I don't know if that helps, but that's one thing that if you study the program, you understand the person a little bit better if you're going to try to investigate or help them and see their behavior.
Thank you very much. And thank you. Those questions were great, everyone. I've really appreciated the questions that have come in at the end of every session. They've been phenomenal. And I just wanted to highlight real quickly before I get off with Joe today what's coming up tomorrow. At noon tomorrow, we have a live presentation with Q&A from Ron Burks. His presentation's titled Recovery and Bible-Based Groups. He kind of gave a little bit of a summary of his talk, which I'd like to read real quickly. He said, this is not intended to promote or put down any mainstream Christian views. It is cognitive behavioral therapy applied to our more or less fixed views that we hold about ourselves, about others, and about God that we no longer think are true, but don't know what to think when we see certain passages in the Bible. Traditional principles of literary interpretation have been carefully used for centuries by Christian and Jewish theologians before them to understand and communicate what the written message meant to the original hearers and what that implies about how we might understand it today. A few passages will be examined, but discussion is encouraged. This webinar is about understanding a legitimate process and contrasting it with that to which we are exposed to in the group. We are not as concerned here about what we believe or once believed as we are the process by which we came to believe. So I just wanted to encourage anyone who's interested. That's going on tomorrow at noon Eastern time. And it will be live Q&A just like this set up with Joe. And Joe, thank you so much for being on and
Sure.
speaking. It was amazing.